Hello, my name is Mike Corral. I'm from Santa Cruz, California. I'll introduce myself by saying I've been cultivating and breeding marijuana since approximately 1974. I started breeding and growing cannabis. My girlfriend at the time was suffering from epileptic seizures, was on numerous pharmaceutical medications, and I read in a medical journal about a study that was done in Hebrew University in Israel where marijuana was used to treat laboratory-induced seizures in rats. She was suffering 5 grand mal seizures a day with no relief from the pharmaceutical medications, so I figured we had nothing to lose, and we started growing our own marijuana, and I started breeding. And after about 3 years, we were able to wean her off of all pharmaceutical medications. She became seizure-free and remains seizure-free to this day. That initial start led me to co-found WHAM, the Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana in Santa Cruz. WHAM is the first patient collective founded in the United States. It was founded 3 years before Proposition 215 was passed in California that approved the medical use of marijuana. I was part of the group that wrote the language for Proposition 215. And I was also part of the group that extended that language in 1999 for the state of California. So this first photograph is of our garden in Santa Cruz. You can see some of the plants there. Some have been harvested already in this photograph. This is a photograph from roughly, I would say, 2001. This is a photograph from inside the garden. Having this organization, the reason I'm showing you this is because having this organization allowed me to speak with thousands of patients over the 20 years since this organization was founded. That was my first foray into understanding the medical benefits of marijuana. And in the early days, we didn't really know which parts of the plant were medically efficacious. It was only with the advent of laboratory testing in the last 5 to 10 years that we've actually been able to understand from the patient input to correlate that with the laboratory testing on what the plant itself was actually doing, the benefits it was bringing, and how we could use this information to breed better strains for medical use. This is one of the plants in the garden. It's about halfway through its flowering cycle. This is one of the patient volunteers doing some wet trimming in the garden. WHAM is a patient member collective. Members only. The patients work in the garden. They work in the dispensary itself. This is another view of the garden. Each one of these rows represents a variety of marijuana that we grow for medical purposes. This is the gentleman in this photograph is my legal advisor in Santa Cruz. He's standing in front of what we were calling one of the first legal marijuana plants in the United States at the time. This was 2004. This is when our organization had an injunction against the federal government that prevented any raids from DEA, and we had this injunction for approximately a year and a half where we were completely free to grow the medicine without any hindrance. You can see what he's standing in front of. That's one plant that he's standing in front of. And the in-harvested weight of that one plant was 3.5 kilos of clean, dried material at the end. Here we have a happy harvester. On the right side, the basket, you can see the buds have been trimmed. On the right side, they are untrimmed. So, the patient stories. This is integrally important to cannabis breeding, specifically for medical use. During the course of my time talking with patients, we learned early on the difference between sativa and indica strains. In the early days, people talked about a head high or a body high. That began to be correlated in the early 90s with appetite stimulation, nausea suppression for the sativas, and for anxiety, anti-inflammation, and sleep aids for the indica varieties. As time went on, we were able to identify more and more properties of the plant, and with the patient input, be able to identify within each strain the preferable effects that we were looking for. Now, some of these effects went very far. We had reports from women in their 50s and 60s about improved libido. We had reports of paraplegics, quadriplegics who could get erections, again, with the use of cannabis, which is something that they hadn't experienced in years after their accidents that caused their paralysis. So these were our early indications of the very broad effects that cannabis can have. But the thing we didn't understand was, how can we pinpoint these? How can we breed for these to bring these potentials and individualize them for patients? Uh-oh. Oh, I can see my, I can see the words are a little off balance here. The main thing here is, once we were able to do laboratory testing, we were able to begin to identify from the laboratory tests the cannabinoid levels, the terpene levels, as well as pesticide and fungicides. This is one test that was performed on a high CBD strain. You can see it's 7.2% CBD, 0.2% THC. You can see that the predominant, because this is carboxylized still, it's in the form of CBDA and THCA. But now with these tests, we're able to correlate the testing information with the information patients gave to us. This is another strain that you can see tested at 23.8% THC, 0.6% CBD. And once again, though, because these are carboxylized, everything is in the acid form. Now, these are, on these tests, I only requested the 2 cannabinoids, but now, with testing, it's advanced far enough that in California, we have labs that can test for as many as 20 cannabinoids. They can test for possibly as many as 8 to 10 terpenoids and a few flavonoids. Now, the 2 speakers before me today were very informative on, especially, I can't remember the French gentleman's name, Sebastian, I believe. He did a very excellent report on the CBD, and he detailed a lot of the pathways of cannabinoid biosynthesis within the plant. This is a chart that was provided by Halent Laboratories, which has since merged with another laboratory in the San Francisco Bay Area called Steep Hill. But it gives you an overview of cannabinoids, both in the decarboxylated form and the carboxylated form, as well as some of the terpenoids and their effects on different symptomatology. So we're able to use this information, a chart like this, the lab testing, and the patient input to be able to give us a better idea of how to breed cannabis. In the last 10 years, there have been a number of studies done on marijuana. For me in particular, there are two very, very important studies. This is the first one, Chemotaxonomic Analysis of Cannabinoid Variation in Cannabis by Carl Hillig and Paul Marburg. The main reason for this study was done was to show that there are actually everybody thought that marijuana was just one species, Cannabis sativa, but their study using chemotaxonomic data actually revealed that there are 2 species of cannabis, Cannabis sativa and Cannabis indica. There is also another subspecies, Cannabis ruderalis, but this is more related to Cannabis sativa than to Cannabis indica. So it's considered to be in the sativa family. Now, one of the other important things of this study was that it detailed the biosynthetic pathways of the production of cannabinoids and terpenoids. By giving this information, it gave us an even deeper look at the genetic structure of marijuana, how we can use this genetic structure in breeding to create specific cannabinoid profiles for medical use. In the marijuana world, you hear different names for marijuana, whether it be catatonic, train wreck, sour diesel. The names are meaningless. That tells you absolutely nothing about the plant. The cannabinoid profile and country of origin is what's really needed to be known about cannabis breeding. You really need to come from if you're breeding marijuana, you want to come from a position of knowing what your initial genetics are that you're going to be breeding, whether it be a true to type strain or a hybrid. If you do not know what your starting point is and you're just using any kind of seeds, if those seeds are already hybridized, you're going to have so many combinations of possibilities that could come out of that. It would take generations to grow them out to find the ones that are really the beneficial ones that you're looking for. So with knowing the biosynthetic pathways of cannabinoids and terpenoids and other information that we've gleaned over the years, we can couple that with other information to breed specifically for symptomology. The other study that is very, very important is this study here, Taming THC, Potential Cannabis Synergy and Phytocannabinoid Terpenoid Entourage Effects by Ethan Russo. The information contained in this study with the previous one is really, in my mind, the holy grail of information to use for breeding. The term entourage effect was first coined, I believe it was in 1998 in Israel, and it was coined by, I want to get the name correct, okay, I know it's here someplace in my notes. Okay, the phrase entourage effect was first used in 1998 by Espen Shabbat with Raphael Meshulam from Hebrew University in Israel. This study, basically what it is, it's an epidemiological study that looked through all the available literature at the time to delineate and to be able to understand terpenoids, their relationships to cannabinoids, and how each of them alone and in the entourage effect or their synergy can have medical effects and enhanced medical effects. So now, in this study, in Ethan Russo's studies, there are three main points. One is that he cites studies documenting beneficial effects of cannabinoids. He cites studies documenting beneficial effects of terpenoids. And he also, very importantly, notes which cannabinoids would be augmented by which terpenoid and vice versa. These are the things that we really need to know to be able to breed cannabis for very, very specific purposes in medical use. It's also very necessary for breeding what I call pharmaceutical grade marijuana. There are hundreds of seed companies in the world now selling marijuana seeds. I cannot testify to their professionalism, their validity, the quality of their genetics. One thing I will make a comment on is the movement to do feminized seeds. My opinion is that it's one of the worst things you can do to your cannabis genetics. Feminizing, what you're doing is you're introducing hermaphrodism into your strains. If it works, it only works in the F1 generation. I've been involved with as many as 20 different marijuana grows in California where people have used feminized seeds. And at best, they've only had 50 to 60% female plants. The rest were either hermaphrodites or males. And when you if you try to breed those into future generations, you're going to be increasing the number of hermaphrodites in every generation that you propagate until it gets to a point where they're all hermaphroditic and they're basically useless. And so the whole point for me as a breeder is to breed with what I call true to type genetics. If you start with a landrace variety that you know is fairly pure from wherever in the world you're going to get it, you then must take that, test it, find out what its cannabinoid profile is, and then start breeding within that strain to isolate and to stabilize the genetics you're looking for. In order to stabilize from that point, it takes a minimum of 5 generations. If you're growing outdoors, you're looking at 5 years. It can be done in a couple of years if you're growing indoors under lights, but still you're looking at multiple generations to get to the point of seed stabilization. Now, another thing I know about, and I will say some of the seed companies, I can't testify to all of them, but some of them, is when they breed, they will, let's say they hybridize 2 strains. In my mind, it may be questionable that they know the full genetics of each of the 2 strains that they're hybridizing. When they do that and they grow the subsequent generations, they will, let's say they propagate 100 seeds. Of those, they will test and they will find the one that they're looking for. They will then clone that, and that's what, if you take some of the seed companies in Holland, they will use their clones, grow them for buds, and they will sell the buds from that clone, but the seeds will not be true to type for that particular flower. Because they've selected the one plant that's exhibiting the strain, the cannabinoid profile they're looking for, they have not truly stabilized the seeds. So when they sell seeds, I know in California you can see this on seed advertisements. There will be a seed advertisement with a photograph of a plant, a flower, and underneath that it will say, your plant may not look like this photograph. And that's because it probably won't look like that photograph because it is not stabilized from seed. So, and you will see this very prevalently, and I think if you question very closely the seed companies, you might get interesting answers about this particular part of breeding. This gets me to the next point of where the terpenoids really come in. I don't know how many of you here in the audience have grown marijuana, but everybody's aware of marijuana has a fragrance. The fragrance in marijuana comes from the terpenoids. Cannabinoids have no fragrance whatsoever. And it's noted that the more fruity smelling strains they taste better, they have better effects, and part of that is because of the entourage effect, that the more terpenoids that are in there, the richer they are in terpenes. It not only modulates the taste of the cannabis, but also the effects of the cannabis. So it's very important as a breeder for me, to use fragrance. And I'm just showing a picture of a bud here. It's about halfway through its flowering cycle. At this point, it's exhibiting very fruity flavors, at least that's what we hope. And that gives me an indication as a breeder of the strength of the terpene. Let me back up one moment. In the cannabinoids, CBG, cannabigerol, is a precursor to THC and CBD. The stronger the fragrance you have is an indication of the amount of CBG that your plants are producing. So the stronger your fragrance will eventually come through with higher levels of cannabinoids as well as terpenes, and will generally give you a better medical grade of product. This is another strain from my garden, another strain that I've bred. This is a purple indica strain from Afghanistan. I've been breeding this for approximately 35 years. The strain before that was a South African strain from Malawi. Same thing, being bred for 35 years. So they are highly stable. I can give anybody 100 seeds of these varieties. You can plant them. I can tell you under these kinds of conditions, the day of harvest, how many days it'll take to germinate. I can tell you the approximate bud weight you will have. I can tell you the approximate structure of the plant. So these are characteristics that you will only find in true-to-type genetics. And this is where we need to be going with medical marijuana, is to true-to-type genetics. We need to know exactly what we're growing. As a business, we need to know exactly what we're selling, and we need to be able to guarantee that what we say is true. And we can only do this by breeding true-to-type genetics from countries of origins that we know, that have been tested for cannabinoid profile, terpenoid profiles, and that have been bred for selective purposes. Now, I'm just going to touch on this next point very quickly because we can manipulate cannabinoids and terpenoids in the plant while it's growing. There's numerous studies talking about this. I also have developed some methods that are proprietary, so I don't want to go into the exact methods I use, but it'll just to suffice to say, different wavelengths of light will affect the cannabinoid profiles and terpenoid profiles. This is done through the epigenetic structure of the plant that then affects the gene expression, and it's possible, as it is in humans, with our epigenetic structure, it changes our genes over time and how they're expressed through generation upon generation. It's thought that the same thing happens in plants. So we can use light wavelength changes as well as soil composition to alter the epigenetic structure in plants that will then affect gene expression, which we think will, over generations over time, we can then make that a stable quality as well within the strains that we cultivate. And so that gets me to Fenix Genetics. This is the new seed company, the new kid on the block. This is an offshoot. I've been working in Poland. In Poland, we have we have Zest, and part of Zest is Project Fenix, a medical marijuana program in Poland. Fenix Genetics is an offshoot of that, and we're beginning with the strains that I've developed over the last 30 years that are stabilized, that have been used for medical purposes for more than 20 years with very good results. And we are breeding, and we will continue to use those strains and breed new true-to-type cannabis strains for medical use. When you're growing marijuana, there's really no difference whether you're growing a plant for medical use or recreational use. The difference is that medical use, we're looking for specific cannabinoids, terpenoids, and their relationships to treat specific symptomatology. And this is really the future of where it's going to go for medical use. So with Fenix Genetics, we go from this to this, to this, to this, to that. And this is what we're hoping to come up with in our end, a very high quality, stabilized strain of marijuana that, with enough of these strains stabilized, we can cover the broad spectrum of symptomology that exists within the patient community, not only in the United States and California, but around the world. And Fenix Genetics, we hope to be moving out of the United States and into the European Union very soon. So thank you very much. I'm going to open the rest of this for questions. This is a very huge subject, breeding. I've only touched on a little bit of it, but hopefully it's food for thought, and your questions are very welcome. Thank you very much.
Hey, good evening. I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but you were mentioning in your presentation that you have 100 seats available for like giving to, you know?
That was an experimental conversation.
Okay.
We're not ready to share seeds yet. I mean, they exist for sure, but we're not going to share them right now currently. That was just to give an example that if 100 seeds of a true to type strain are germinated and grown out, that they should all look exactly the same all through their growing cycle, given that they have the same conditions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was a very good question, though.
Okay, I understand you have a similar structure and consistency in each seed that you have in the stabilized strains, but THC and CBD profiles, how much consistency do you have in your seeds in that when you test?
They're generally within 1% to 2% of each other.
Of consistent with their sisters.
Yes, year over year. In fact, the photograph you're looking at now, when I was in the section of breeding with your nose, and there was a purple flower there, this is the same variety. The one that was in the breeding with your nose was a photograph taken 10 years ago. This is a photograph taken 2 years ago. So you can see they're virtually identical in appearance, and their test results are virtually identical.
The one from 10 years previous was tested as well?
Yes. Yes. At 10 years ago, we didn't have the testing facilities as they exist now, so we could only test for THC and CBD.
CBD or not terpenes, I guess.
No, at that point, terpenes were something that were rumored. Let's say there was more of a rumor. Even though terpenes are well known in the flower kingdom, you know, terpenes have been extensively analyzed, used for many, many purposes. There's something like 20,000 terpenes in the plant world, and they're completely legal. They do have medical properties themselves, which have been demonstrated, but they do have, with the entourage effect, far greater effects.
Do you work with documenting medical cases to show what profiles work best, and using terpenes as well in the whole spectrum?
We're beginning to do that. I was part of a study published in Cannabis Therapeutics in 2001, and it was an early study where we basically paired cannabis sativa varieties and cannabis indica varieties to different symptomologies. And you can go online and actually read that study. Like I say, it was in Cannabis Therapeutics.
Is that study not still currently being documented and going?
As far as I know, you can find it online still.
No, but I mean, you're not continuing on with that study currently?
No, not at this moment. No, right now we are in talks to start doing some other studies here in the EU as well as in California.
Nice.
Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. Taking time, I would like to find out, maybe it's close to your interest, but you were talking about symptomology and strains. From your years' experience, could you tell us which symptomology and which strains work for which illness and dysfunction?
Well, that's a big question, but basically what it really gets down to is the differences between cannabis sativa and cannabis indica. Research now is beginning to, there's a lot of information now from research telling us what each cannabinoid symptomology works for. Early on, like I said earlier in my talk, we noticed that cannabis indica seemed to work better for pain than cannabis sativa. Cannabis sativa seemed to work better for appetite stimulation, nausea suppression than indica. My personal opinion is that marijuana just works, period, for everything. Within that, you have specific patient needs, and that's where the differences come to play. There's also, we need to be a little careful because it's very little known, but in my organization, I had reports from 2 members that had allergic responses to marijuana. One person was allergic to cannabis sativa, and the other was allergic to cannabis indica. We have no idea what that mechanism is. One of these individuals could actually rub the flower of the sativa on her skin, and she would begin to get a rash. and she knew right away. That's how she identified. If somebody gave her something, if she didn't know if it was sativa or indica, that's the first thing she did to identify if it was sativa or indica. But I would say the best recommendation is to go online and read about the symptomology that cannabis works for. It's numerous. There's just far more information there than I can really answer at this moment, and far more than there's time to. But I encourage you to go online to check it out. There's a huge body of research information.
Nějaké další dotazy? More questions?
Okay, my second question. You mentioned in your presentation that you are going to be working from European Union now, or you're gonna establish an office here?
Yeah, well, for
What's
the
the
first,
reason?
I'm sorry?
What's the reason of that?
To spread medical marijuana around the world.
Oh, nice.
There's still a lot of misinformation. I've been working in Poland, and about 4 years ago, when you used the words medical and marijuana together, people looked at you like you were crazy. How could you put, what do those two words have to do with each other? It's now a different world.
Yeah, that's true.
Pardon?
Yeah, that's true.
Yes,
it
well,
is true.
But it's like, you know, look at Cannafest. There's so much information here. It's a huge thing. It's unstoppable now. Marijuana is here to stay, medical use and recreational. It's just the coming future.
Yeah, but I just have to say one thing. Yeah, I am not involved in politics or anything like that. But this country, like Czech Republic and Poland, you know, here is lots of you know, corruption, you know, or meaning the word means two things. Yeah, corruption, like you bribe someone or someone bribes you, and the other meaning is that only people talk about that, and it's virtual, like, you know. And I don't understand kind of politics here in Czech Republic, yeah, but I really don't like it about stuff like smoke and that, you know. They can look, our president, yeah. You know, he is just talking in a broadcast in Czech Republic from very special place, which has been used by the first president of Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, and he is broadcasting talks like from that place, and he's swearing, like, you know. I mean, that's crazy, yeah? You live in a country where a president can swear, and you cannot fucking have a joint and smoke, you know?
It is crazy making, but let me just make one comment. I'm from the United States, and I can tell you that Czech Republic does not own corruption. Corruption exists everywhere in all governments, and this is why we are the ones here in this movement that can change that. The governments, the authorities, they don't know anything about marijuana, the benefits, they know nothing. It's up to us to tell the authorities, to tell our governments what the truth is, and it's up to us to keep our governments honest. They aren't going to do it for themselves. It's up to us to do this. We are the ones who can change the world. It's up to us to take the steps to stand up and hold our government's feet to the fire and do what is right for the people. And that's up to us to make that happen. So I agree with you. It's crazy making. When I've been arrested 3 times in the state of California, twice by local authorities, once by DEA. It's a different world now. You know, last time I was arrested was 2002. It's possible I could get arrested again. I don't know. But the world is changing. We have to have faith in ourselves that we can change the world, that we can make a difference.